morning, friends. I hope everyone is having a good day. We are going to get started in just about a minute. Today we are going to do an exploration with Bales, which is a pattern that I have always loved. I think that there's just so much that you can do with it that, you know, it's something that definitely deserves some time, right? So I want to show you a couple examples, and then I'm going to dive right in. I am cutting it just a little short today, so I did do a little bit of prep work in advance for some of the patterns. I have a class that I'm going to myself at noon, so but I wanted to take this time and share this with you. So some of the ways that I talk about using patterns in general that I've done here as examples are using bales as a string. I talk about doing this a lot. If you draw your patterns larger and you use them as the framework for your other patterns, then you can get some really, really cool stuff going on, right? I like to do this a lot with grid patterns, and then I like to do it with some that maybe you don't think about either. So in this case, I did bales a little bigger than I normally would, and I made them kind of skinny. This tends to be the way that I draw bales the most often, and I'm going to try really hard to remember to make them a little more rounded than I normally do. But I like to do that, and then rather than spending a lot of time shading my individual tangles or even shading my bales, I just kind of do a drop shadow around the whole thing. This is traditional bales. I haven't done any shading on this yet because I am going to show you a couple of different ways to shade this, and I wanted to have one fairly completed to do that on. And then this seems really, really simple, right? But this is, you've heard me use the word macro before. You know, to take a fragment that we use and just make it larger. Macro tends to be a photography term, but I really like the concept. So in this case, I did a macro of bales, and I used it to actually create a frame. So with that said, there's just a couple of things. I'm going to grab my tile and encourage you to do the same. How is everyone doing this morning? Everybody is kind of quiet. I see nobody. I mean, I see you there, but I see that you are being very, very sneaky and quiet this morning. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to start with my dots. And we're going to draw bales the way I first learned to draw bales. Okay, so first I'm going to put in my border here. Set my pencil off to the side. Morning, Linda. And now I am going to create an arc. And I always like to draw this on the diagonal, but you could draw it straight across if you want to. So I'm going to take my pen. There's nothing like a brand new micron. I love brand new microns. I have an arc. I'm going to leave a little bit of space. I'm going to draw another. It's basically an aura, right? I'm going to do that again. One more. I'm going to turn my tile so it's a little easier for my hand. Make another and one more. Okay, so I have this series of fairly evenly spaced lines on a slight curve. Now I'm going to do another line that arcs across my tile. I'm going to leave about the same space. And I'm just going to do this until I have a nice grid. Again, turning my tile when it works best for my hand. There's a lot of great stuff out there about Bales. In fact, Maria Thomas, one of the creators of Zentangle, actually has a sheet out there, and I will link to that later so that you can see some of the really cool tangulations that you can do with this that I'm not even going to get into today. Good morning, Flo. Good morning, Helene. All right. So once you have your grid done, and you could do your grid in pencil if you wanted to. I always do mine in ink because I think that is a nice part of the tangle. But if you didn't want your grid to show, you could also always do it in pencil, which is a nice little variation. So I always like to start somewhat in the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to pick some of these crisscrossy lines, and I'm going to draw a little, like a crescent moon almost kind of shape, right? That little ladybug shape that we use so often, like a C on its side. And I'm going to make that all the way across my first row, right? And I could have started anywhere on this. I just find that it tends to be easiest for me if I start right in the middle. Okay. I'm going to do this on all of my rows. And remember, I always go kind of quick in my lives because I want to give you as much information as possible. I always leave the Facebook Live up so that you can watch it over and over as many times as you like until you get all the information that you need. And I encourage you to take what I have shared with you and make these your own. So once I have all of these little ladybug shapes, these little crescent moon shape, whatever you want to call them, these little C's on their sides, going kind of dancing across each row, I'm going to turn my tile upside down, and I'm going to mirror that on the other side so that it kind of looks like a little coffee bean or a grain of rice. I said this once in a class, and I had a young man, probably about 12, 13 years old in my class, and he said, or chicken lips. And it took me a couple minutes to realize what he meant, but he was thinking like a beak, like if you were looking at a beak full on. So I've never been able to forget that. I always think of it that way now. Chicken lips. So I am going to do that on every row. And you can see here where it hits my border, I'm not finishing it. I'm just kind of going to my border. I love the look where it looks as if the pattern is going off of the page. So I do that a lot in my work. Okay. So now you have, like, if you look at it from the side, you kind of have these chains. Good morning, Marlies. Welcome. So I have like these chains going down, or sideways, however you choose to look at it. I have these lines that are going through. I'm going to turn my tile so that these lines now become my rows, and I'm going to replicate what I've already done. So I'm creating that little C shape, that crescent moon, that little ladybug shape on the tops of all of these, right? This is a very old pattern. You will see this pattern in many, many things. Target uses it all the time. But it, if you know anyone that quilts, you will recognize this as a wedding ring pattern. And in tangling, we call it Bales. Okay, so I'm going to turn it again, upside down, and I'm going to finish that off by, again, making that coffee bean, that rice shape, those chicken lips. however you want to think about it, whatever makes it easy for you to think about. And you can see that it's creating these circular patterns along with these little seed shape patterns. There's so many things that you can do with this pattern because there's so many different pieces that you can embellish and play with. Hi Barbara, hi Sandra, welcome. You know, I love any pattern that has a bunch of stuff in it because there's a lot we can do. We can, so when I learned how to do this pattern, and this is the one that I did before, I created an aura of the inside right here. Okay, so I'm going to do that now. And I'm not going to do this on all of these because for time's sake I want to show you some other things. But I'm just going on the inside and adding an aura to these seed shapes. And you could choose to color those in. You could choose to place a pattern in them. Whatever you do, that gives you a lot of different opportunities. You could... I like to use like these skinny little line work, right? Just to kind of vary it up. You could put another pattern in there. Or if you're so inclined, you could leave the aura off and go in a different direction. And I'm going to spend some time doing that as well. So, in shading, and the reason this tile isn't shaded is because I'm going to shade it in a bunch of different ways, which is going to give you a whole lot of different variety, not even mixing up the pattern. Okay, so you can see just how adding a little pattern into those auras makes it look very different than this one, right? So I'm going to set that off to the side. I have here, let's see. All right, so now you can see that I have two tiles that I have already drawn bales on, and they're just slightly different in size, but that doesn't really matter. It is the same basic pattern drawn, 3 different ways. I have not added the auras on this one, but I wanted to show you some of the different ways to shade this, because I find that with bales, when you shade it in different ways, you get completely different looks. So I'm going to take this first one that I do have my auras drawn on, and I'm going to show you what it looks like if you add just a little, like a little circle, little orb of graphite at each of your intersections. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm taking my pencil. I like to use mechanical pencils a lot. I'm adding a little bit of graphite, and then I'm just softening it. Okay, and as I soften it, I'm kind of moving the graphite in almost a little X, and it takes on a quilted or a tucked type of look. So you can see there's a lot more dimension coming into this now once I added just that little bit of shading, right? So I've got that going on. Okay, I can come in with my graphic pen and color in these shades, or these sections in the center. I'm not going to do this with all of these. I just really want you to kind of see how changing up this center piece, and I'm going to First I'm going to go over these with a nice thick line, right? And then in this next row, and I'll finish these off all in a little while before I do the pattern sheet later, but you can see how just adding a nice bold line again takes this to a different level than this. And if you then go in and even color them in either halfway or all the way, again you get completely different look, right? So that's just one of the areas that you can play with on this pattern to get a lot of variety fairly simply. I am a huge fan of taking patterns and changing them up so that you get different looks. I'm going to set that one off to the side. I'm going to pull in this one, and we're going to shade in the corners. So I'm going into these corners of my bales, and I'm adding little V shapes with my graphite. And this changes the focus a little bit, right? And again, I'm not finishing these tiles because I just want to give you the ideas that you can then run with and play with. So then I soften right along the inside, and now I've changed the look. Now the focus is going to once again be on these cross beams. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. You know, if you add in, going back to this again, if you add in patterns in here, it changes it too. So you can then add in different patterns. Like we have this empty space because we didn't add an aura in here, so to speak. We've just kind of added some shading. This would be a great spot to go in and add an underlying pattern, right? So if you wanted to come in maybe, let's see, what pattern might I want to use in here? You know what, I'll do that on another tile. We'll just leave this one for the shading. And then with this one, if you wanted to place your focus on the rings, right? If you wanted to, you could add shading to, say, the bottom and one side of each of these. You're going to create a focus on the ring as opposed to the center. Okay, so then you almost get like a fish scale, or like a tiled impression, right? It looks like they're stacked, which is a fun way to play with the shading. So there are lots of different pieces of this for you to play with in the way you draw it, but there are an equal number, if not more, ways to play with the shading on this. And each variation will give you limitless possibilities. So with that said, everybody see how the shading can really change things up? All right. I have a quiet group this morning. I always laugh because when I do Facebook Lives, it always feels like I'm talking to myself. All right. So, I created another tile. This one I made my my little C shapes chunkier. I made them fat and round and kind of squishy because I wanted you to see the difference between drawing them like this and drawing them like this, And in this one I did my grid straight up and down as opposed to on a diagonal. So again, exact same pattern, minor variations, right? Really hardly any variations at all, but a very different look. So now I'm going to come in and I am going to add in these shapes a pattern. So I'm just adding in some printemps in the center here, right? So, and you could place any pattern you wanted. You could do tipple, you could do flux, you could do, you could do a grid type pattern in here. You could do anything. You're only limited by your own imagination, right? So, if we know that in tangling alone there's over 200, or in the official Zentangle patterns alone there's over 250 patterns, right? So if we mix those all up and we play with them together, we never have to be bored with our patterns. And then if you look around at all the amazing patterns that other tanglers and CZTs have created themselves, it's infinite, right? So you can see how adding a pattern into the center gives it a completely different look. I know I say that a lot, but that's really the goal here, right? My classes aren't so much about composition, or I shouldn't say my classes. My Facebook Lives aren't so much about composition as giving you ideas and hoping that you will take them and that you will run with them to really discover a pattern that maybe either you didn't like before or make you think of it in a new way, and to change things up a little bit, right? So I'm not going to finish the whole thing. Again, I'll come back and I will add details and I will play with that some more to get it finished for when I put out the pattern sheets. And with this one, I probably would just shade in my corners, and I wouldn't do much. Instead of doing an actual V, I'm just kind of putting a tiny little line of graphite there. And then I will just come in with my tortillon and I'll just soften that a little bit. I'm not going to use that tortillon. That one's done. Sometimes you just need a new tortillon, right? But then that adds this layer of depth to it. And if I wanted to expand further, I could embellish these little seed shapes as well. I'm not going to, not for this one. Okay. Let's see here. All right, so I have this one done in advance because I wanted to mix it up and show you just 3 little variations all on one tile. Okay, so again, I'm going to make, in this case, larger C shapes, right? I want them fairly big. And this is not supernatural to me. I tend to draw them smaller. So for me, I have to actually make the effort to make them chunky and round and bubbly. Which is funny because most of my tangling is bigger. I tend to draw nice, chunky tangles. But for some reason, and I think it's just because that's the way I started to draw it when I first learned it, that's just the way I do it. Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but I like to mix it up. There we go. Alright, so now I've turned it. I'm going to make these nice, chunky all the way across each of my rows. Flip it upside down. I should probably do this one here too. Right? Flip it upside down. Finish those off so that I have those rings. And now I don't have a lot of space in the centers. And that's okay. I can come in and I can just do something like place a little dot in the middle. Okay, now I'm going to, I'll go with this one. I'm going to make my C shape, and I made it kind of skinny. I'm going to do that on all of these. Flip it upside down, my little C shape. So these are nice and narrow as opposed to these nice chunky ones that I have going on there. Turn it and go across, C shape, C shape, right? Okay. Now I'm going to aura these individual C shapes. So I'm just adding an extra loop on each side of each line, right? So these are growing in size and getting chunkier as well. And if I had a lot of room, I'd do a bunch of these. But I don't have a ton of room, so I'm just going to do one on each side. Right? And now I'm going to come in. I'm going to do a little aura on the inside of each of these. And you'll notice, you know, they're not all exact. They're not all exactly the same size, and that's okay. And you can come in with, let's see, I'm going to use my graphic for this just because I think it's nice and bold. You can come in and you can add, like, this is just a little curved, almost like a little X. I'm just putting a little loop where they each come together, which adds just a neat little accent in there. And then you can mix up all those different shading techniques as well to, you know, get some even more even more little pops, right? So one more on this. I'm going to make my C shapes. I'm going to do them kind of like a mid-size this time. And how you draw them is entirely up to you. I tend to tip my page, but a lot of people prefer to draw them, you know, horizontally. But I tend to do mine just in whatever is most comfortable for my hand on that given day. In my regular classes, we go much slower, and we spend a lot of time with composition, and we pay attention to the overall format. But in my lives, I just always want you to remember that my goal is to give you as many variations and as many new ideas that you can possibly get in a very short period of time. So please keep that in mind. And if you are not on my newsletter list, you can certainly, there is a link to it on my Facebook page if you look for it. My newsletter did just come out. If you sign up for it in the next couple days, I will forward on a copy of that for you. So I'm not going to do anything else to this one. I just wanted you to be able to see the three different kind of ways, just changing the size and the shape and the angles, how, you know, how different that looks on the same tile. And now the last thing I'm going to do before we wrap for today, because like I said, I am ending just a little bit early today. I wanted to come in, and I'm actually going to do it on this tile. Okay, I am going to add in an orb in my pencil. I'm going to add a slightly larger orb, so it kind of looks like a donut, and then I'm going to add one more. Okay, because remember I said I was just using this as a frame. So now I'm going to come in, and in that, so I'm gonna refine those lines now that I did them in pencil. Most of the time I draw them flat out, but I really kind of wanted them to look pretty uniform. Okay, so I'm going to finish this off. I'm going to draw a grid like a bullseye. Okay, and now I want to show you how, by adding those shapes, you can use Bales in a round grid. I appreciate everyone joining me today. I am sorry I had to cut it a little short. I'm going to be wrapping up here in just a minute so that I'm not too terribly late to my class. And I hope I see you all again next Saturday. I do these at 11:30 every Saturday. That's Eastern Time. If I went too fast for you, which I understand may very well be the case, my videos stay up, so you can certainly always replay them as many times as you'd like, watch them over and over. Eventually I will be moving them all over to my website where I have better control over them than I do on Facebook, but for now they're all going to stay on Facebook, and I will give everyone lots of notice before I move them anywhere. And these are always free. I offer one free actual class about every 6 weeks right now, and I do have some paid classes as well. You're always welcome to join. Most of those tend to lean towards my watercolor work or Zentangle inspired art. There are so many amazing CZTs teaching pure Zentangle that I like to spend my pure Zentangle offerings on my Saturday mornings at this point. So, all right, there you have it. You can see we have Bales in a round, which is always something that's kind of fun and a neat way to change it up. You could do it in, triangles or rhombuses or rectangles, whatever is exciting for you. And then always feel free to just embellish any way you like. I hope everybody has a wonderful, it is Labor Day weekend here in the U.S., so I hope everyone has a safe and fun holiday weekend. All right, and look for the pattern sheet later today. Everyone have a great day.